We are doing this to help you guys and to help me create some energy on my end. It'd be great to see your actual faces. And that had absolutely no effect at all.
No effect at all. No. Well, as we get into the course content and as we work our way through, we'll keep reminding everybody it is Monday morning, right? 11 a.m. So
it's 8 a.m. for me. Come on, people.
That's very early. That's very early for real estate time.
Right.
Awesome, Gord. Well, I'll give you the floor. We're going to be doing a great session today on rent to own and the benefits and how rent to own can help you generate more business. So this is something that we've touched on during the course a few times. We haven't really gone in depth a lot, but today we're going to go and peel off a lot more layers and show you how you can do more business, why rent to own benefits the person who is actually renting, how it benefits the seller, and how it benefits the investor that's involved with the rent-to-own project as well. We'll go through all three scenarios and show in depth exactly how it benefits everybody and how you can generate a lot more business using this strategy.
Absolutely. So let's kick it off. So welcome, everybody. And, you know, although we're going to be covering rent to own. So although we covered rent to own in the real estate investor success system, we are going to kind of get into a bit of the minutia of it. We thought it would be a good topic considering how underutilized this strategy is, how unknown this is to the general public, but how beneficial it is to both the investor and what I'm calling the tenant buyer. And you all know firsthand the amount of people wanting to get into the housing market who currently maybe can't qualify for a mortgage and who may be relegated to being forever tenants. Well, at least in their own mind anyway. Now, why? Because no one, quite frankly, has provided them the option or exposure to the rent to own program. So how does the rent to own work? Well, just as a refresher and to remind you of a simple way to explain this to anyone, let's do the car lease analogy. And I'm going to use one of my favorite classic cars here. So there's many similar aspects to a car lease. So basically, your buyer, if you will, or the tenant buyer, they choose a car. They agree to the price, they agree to the lease term, they pay an initial deposit, they pay a monthly lease amount that's been agreed upon, they know what the buyout cost is at the end of the term to buy the car out, and they agree to the terms of the whole lease. So the terms being, the leasee must put in gas and oil, have insurance, keep the vehicle in good shape, and are responsible basically for ongoing maintenance, or if they get in an accident, it's all on them. And there's a penalty to break the lease. And at the end of the lease term, they basically have the choice to buy out the car, but they can walk away, as you know, but they sacrifice that initial deposit and all the lease money that they've paid. And of course, they know this from day one when they actually signed the agreement. So in the same way, here's an overview of the rent to own. So like in a car lease deal, the parties involved are the dealership or the salesperson and the buyer. So in the rent to own, there's an investor who basically buys the house and a tenant buyer who occupies the house. And that's what we're going to refer to them from this point on, a tenant buyer, because they're acting in both those roles. And because they'll obviously occupy and rent the house for a certain amount of time, and then they've got the option to buy the property at the end of the term. So there's two ways investors provide properties to their tenant buyers. One is called property first, where the investor actually owns the existing property already. They advertise to find that tenant buyer who then, should they like the property and want to move forward, they get involved in the rent-to-own program. The second and most common way really is the tenant buyer first, where the investor pre-qualifies the tenant buyer upfront and then sends them out with you, the agent, to actually find a property which adheres to their qualification amount. And then the investor buys the property. Now, the tenant buyer agrees to the sale price, and that's the ultimate sales. That's the sale price at the end of the term, and we'll get more into that. So that's not the current price that the investor is buying it for. That's the price at the end of the agreed upon term. And the tenant pays fair market value rent throughout the term, and they also pay a monthly option consideration fee. And we'll get into that in a moment. So in either scenario, the tenant buyer puts down a deposit, which is a specific amount, and there's no rules to this. It could be 1%, it could be 2%, 3% of the ultimate purchase price. Basically an amount which is enough that the tenant buyer can provide, which is enough skin in the game that it would hurt them to lose. Okay, so it's not like $1,000. It's like, you know, something significant. And then the tenant buyer must pay fair market value rent and also pay an amount above the rent known as an option consideration fee. And the thing is here, the initial deposit, the option consideration fee are actually a forced savings plan for them, which gets credited back to them at closing. Okay. So what are the tenant buyer's responsibility throughout this? Well, they have to pay rent and the option fee or option consideration fee on time every month. Okay. If they don't pay, if they're late on that, they actually can lose their option consideration. Next, they have to take care of the property. Now, that means that they will have pride of ownership. So unlike tenants who, as you can imagine, don't necessarily have pride of ownership, tenant buyers have pride of ownership because why? They're going to buy the property. So they're not going to put their fist through the wall in a fit of rage. They are not going to plug up their toilets. And tell me, just as a sidebar, why is it only rental properties ever have the plugged toilets? Anyone got an answer for that? I've been a landlord for years and I've never had a plugged toilet in my own house, but they seem to happen in rental properties. Anyway, I digress. They have to pay basically all the utilities and pay incidental repairs. And what do I mean by that? Well, that can be an agreed upon amount that the investor and the tenant buyer agree upon that could be $200, $300, $400 per incident, meaning that all of the small repairs are covered by the tenant buyer. Any large repairs on a large ticket item like a furnace, roof, electrical, plumbing, anything to that nature would be covered by the investor. But the investor will already know the fail time on any of the larger ticket items before they go into the deal, because they will have gotten a property inspection. They'll know this and they will have made the necessary negotiations going in. So if the tenant buyer's lease or the term of this rent to own is 5 years, the investor is going to ensure that they know that there's at least 5 years or more left on all the high ticket items. Make sense? So the rent to own investor benefits. So basically, if you remember, the 7 profit centers of real estate that they are able to take advantage of during this term. So there's cash flow, there's mortgage pay down, tax advantages, forced appreciation, market appreciation, which the investor builds into the sale price, and I'll get to that in a moment. Leverage, obviously, because the bank provides 75 or 80% of the money for the purchase, and reinvestment, which is taking the profits out of once the rent to own is done and turning around and doing it again. Then there is the cash from the initial deposit and the option consideration fee, and the investor has this as security as they move forward. Then there's uninterrupted rent. So as the difference between this and just a straight up rental is, in a straight up rental, there's vacancies that the landlord has over time. The tenant buyer here must not be late on any payments, or they can lose all the cash they've put in. So therefore, do you think they'll be paying on time with that much cash on the line? So that would mean that that is completely non-interrupted rent, okay? As I mentioned, there's little to zero maintenance issues because the tenant buyer will be buying the property and they will have that pride of ownership, okay? And again, if they do put foreign objects down the toilet, they're responsible for the repair of that because they've agreed upon taking care of those incidentals. And then, of course, there's a built-in sale with the timeline and the price being in the initial contract. So let's understand the mechanics and who this is actually for. Who would want to do this? Who wants to be a tenant buyer? Well, this is for people generally that are moving up the ladder, okay? So that means people are making regular income. It's for people who want to stop chasing the market and build in a actual price so they know that they're buying that, and then begin building equity in that property. And it's for people who are looking to live in their dream home today. It's for people who are becoming, getting serious. So maybe they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're becoming serious. They're becoming families, and they want to live in an area that they want, because renters have to live where they actually find a place they can afford. So there's less choice on the location. And here there is more choice by the tenant buyer to actually choose an area that they want to live in with the right schools and just an area that reflects their new income. So this is for people who also don't mortgage qualify. And these reasons can be credit blemishes. So if their credit is bad, and if they're coming from their 20s and they've been a little neglectful on how they and where they spend their money and how they pay back the loans that they've created on their credit cards or leases or what have you, then they could be taking a poor credit score into their, say, into their 30s or what have you, when they're starting to look for a property. This can also be for new professionals. Now think about this. If there's a new lawyer, doctor, dentist, engineer, and they're going through many years of university, and now they're setting up their own practice, they know that they're going to be into the top level of income. However, they are coming out of an expensive university time, and they have money. They have a lot of money that they have to put into actually starting their own practices. So they could just be out of money and not consequently being able to actually mortgage qualify. But do they want to live in an area where they have to rent? No, they'll be more apt to be targeting a place where there's a lot of home buyers that actually reflects the position that they have moved into professionally. And then, of course, there's people that are new to Canada that don't have any credit history at all. So they don't qualify, but they come with money, right? And then, of course, just the lack of down payment that can be across the board. And of course, this is reflected in the next biggest wave that is coming, which is millennials, right? So, and that's why I have this picture of a millennial here. So there's a ton of millennials. I know there's been polls stating that millennials, over like about 50% of them never think that they will ever own a home. I think it's even more than 50%. They're relegated to in their mind being full-time, lifetime renters because they don't think that they'll ever be able to afford a home because property prices continue to go up, and they just can't afford to create or save enough for a down payment because they're always chasing that appreciating market. So the rent to own is a perfect way for millennials to get in to a house today and stop chasing the market because they'll know their ultimate sales price.
Gord, can we just keep it here for a couple of minutes and just really talk through some of these points that you have up here? Because I mean, I think these are absolutely amazing, and I think if you can build a conversation around any one of these points, you can really start to understand how you can do more business and how you can use this to your advantage as a real estate professional. So Abu just asked in one of the chats is, how do we find rent-to-own properties? So the idea here, Abu, is that any property that you find on the market can become essentially a rent-to-own property. You're putting a third person to the mix, right? So instead of finding a property for rent, you're basically using an intermediary step and finding an investor who will purchase that property and in turn rent it out to the user. But there's an exit strategy because for the investor, they know in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending how you structure the rent to own, there's an exit strategy there. So they know what their money commitment is, and they know what their appreciation will be over a given time period as well, right?
We'll go into that, and I'll get into the minutia of that, what you just said, David. And
did you see the message from Reddit?
Sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit probably.
It's okay.
But you can use any one of these points as a lead generation platform. So for example, if you take a look at the credit blemishes line, right? Say you start advertising that, hey, if you have bad credit, I can find you a house.
But you need money.
You need money, right? Like one or the other, right? But you don't necessarily have to use the term rent to own. You can keep that in your back pocket. That's how you structure the deal. But how do you start the conversation with people in the first place, right? So these are some excellent points, Gord, that you have on the board where you can really start marketing and you can really start a conversation with people out there. So things like, you don't have good credit. Well, I can still find you a house. Let me show you how.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get into the minutiae of the rent to own, right? You don't qualify for a mortgage today for whatever reason. I can still get you into a house. Let me show you how. Right.
Exactly.
You're a brand new professional to Canada. You don't want to buy right away. Let me show you a better way than to rent. Call me today. Let me show you a better way than just renting and throwing your money out there. But do you see how you're getting the conversation going? It all starts with the right conversation, right? So I wouldn't necessarily go out there and start advertising rent to own because people don't understand what the benefit of rent to own is. What I would do is I would use rent to own to solve these issues, right? Solve these issues, have a conversation with people about these issues: lack of down payment, new to Canada, a new professional. Why are you going to rent? Let me show you a better alternative. You don't have good credit? No problem. We can still find you a house. Call me today. Let me show you how. You don't qualify for a mortgage? Well, let me show you an alternative way of how you can own your home, right? And once you start having these conversations, right, the doors are going to open up wide. And then if you're known in the industry, if you're known in the neighborhood as a person that can solve these problems easy and effortlessly by using the rent to own model, you're going to be that much further ahead.
Excellent points, David, for sure. And you can encourage your investors to also be advertising all these same things, and say, can't mortgage qualify today? Well, stop throwing your money away on rent. Live in your dream home today. Call me, and we have a program that'll work for you.
And I mean, on the investor side as well, you can actually show an investor, hey, listen, this is the product that I believe in, right? These are the issues that we're solving on the other side. And let me show you how it looks for you. This is how much money you need to put in. Let me show you how that looks on paper for you, what your exit strategy is. By the way, you're going to get a AAA tenant that's going to put in their own cash in the game. They're going to be tied to the property. They're going to pay rent on time, and they're going to maintain the property, and they're going to respect the property as if it were their own. Is that something that you're interested in? Now, as an investor, take a look at those benefits I just mentioned. Wouldn't you want a better quality tenant? Wouldn't you want somebody that's forced to pay on time? Otherwise, they lose all these options. Wouldn't you want somebody that knows that they're going to be buying this property in the future and they're personally invested in it? Right? There's a lot of benefits here, right? It's all how you structure the conversation.
And just as a spoiler, David has totally burst my bubble here for what's upcoming.
Sorry, I'm just really excited. Go ahead.
As a spoiler, there'll be a little redundancy here now.
Right. My bad. I'm just excited.
It's all good. It's all good. So I do want to, is it okay? Can I move on?
Please.
Are we ready? Okay. So I just want to show you, I got this from a recent article and I just pulled out some highlights here. So a resident would need to earn $94,000 below before taxes to afford a house and a car, or $55,000 to afford rent and be taking public transit. And this report breaks down estimates for monthly expenses for an individual who rents and takes public transit. So check this out. So if they're just renting, it's $23.50 basically for a 1-bedroom unit, $258 for transportation, $533 for food, $155 to pay phone and internet, $178 for entertainment, which barely covers the GO train to Hamilton, apparently. And if they have a gym membership, $60 or whatever. So that adds up to over $3,500 a month. So it's no secret why many people, including millennials, can't save for a down payment. But the rent to own creates a forced savings plan, which builds towards their ultimate down payment. So let's just break this down a bit. So the tenant buyer, again, there's no right answer here, but a 1%, 2%, or 3% deposit. It needs to be an amount, again, which is enough skin in the game that would hurt to walk away from. And then there's a residential lease, so which reflects fair market value rent. They also sign an agreement which allows them the first right of refusal to buy the property within X amount of months or years at a predetermined price. and they're paying that monthly option consideration fee. So just as a note, the contract could be an option contract, an option to purchase contract, or it even could be a regular offer with a closing date of whenever the agreed upon closing date is in the future. So, so check with a lawyer on this, or even with David, whatever he feels is the best way to do this, because this can actually be different from province to province. What is the best contract here? So let's just do a little example of some numbers. So let's say your client, your investor client, found a property which had a secondary suite. And by the way, this is a great scenario, as the investor will have two incomes, and the advantage to the tenant buyer who ultimately buys the property, they'll be able to use the secondary suite for rent as a mortgage helper or for whatever they want. So, but I mean, there's no right or wrong here. It could be a single family, it could be a condo, townhouse, detached home, anything actually works here. So a purchase of $775,000. So if the investor puts in a 20% down payment of $155,000, let's say their closing cost is $1,500, and they've got a mortgage balance of $620,000. Now follow this along. Let's do a rate of 3% just for fun. So we've got a mortgage payment of $2,935. Let's say their taxes are $380 a month. Their insurance, let's say, is $160. And let's say they're paying $275 for utilities. And that's only for the secondary suite, not the main area that the tenant buyer is in, because they're paying all their own utilities. Okay, so we've got $3,750 at the end of this. So that's the expense amount. Let's look at the income side. So with the investor purchase of 775%, so how do we come up with what, let's say it's a 5-year rent to own term, okay? So what has the market appreciation been over the last 5 years? What's the average appreciation been? David, if you're there, can you give me an idea in the GTA what the average market appreciation's been over 5 years?
Different in all market segments, but
Of course, just a random off the cuff average.
I would say 8%.
Okay, thank you. So I've got 6% here, and there's no rules here, but obviously you as the agent can find out this easily. So whatever market area that the property's in, you can pull comps, you can find out the area appreciation for, and if the term is 1 or 2 years, you can go back that long. If it's 5 years, go back that long, find out the average appreciation. And we're substantiating this to the tenant buyer. So you're able to help in this process by telling the investor, okay, so the average market appreciation, as David said, let's say was 8%, I've got 6% on the screen here. But how would it be if, so you're just saying that the investor is saying to the tenant buyer, look, average market appreciation has been 6%. What if we only do a 3% appreciation? How would that be, tenant buyer? So in 5 years, if we do the math on that, that means the purchase in 5 years is $898,000. If it was 6 or 8%, obviously we'd be in the 900, even maybe even close to $1 million. So how much equity is the tenant buyer actually going to get at the end of the day? Now, again, there's no rules on this. You could use, the investor could use 6%, 5%, whatever. We're just showing the tenant buyer that, hey, in our program, this is a win-win. Everybody's going to make money here. And when you buy this property, how much more incentive is it when in 5 years, and of course, no one has the crystal ball, but in 5 years, if you're buying the property from me for $898,000, and it's worth even $920, you're building in $22,000 of equity, right? So does that keep the tenant buyer even more vested?
Absolutely.
Thank you, David. And I hope you speak for all the agents that are on this today. So let's roll out the numbers here. So the initial deposit, let's say it's 3% on that $898 projected and agreed upon price. That's $26,940 that the tenant buyer has to come in with as their skin in the game. Okay. So how many of you would want to walk away from almost $27,000? Anyone? Be a little hard to turn your back on that, right? But you know that if you complete on this, that you actually get that money back as a credit towards the purchase. So you think that'll keep you vested? So that's just another thing to keep you in the deal. Okay. And then of course, the rental amount's going to be $2,800. Okay. And the option consideration fee is going to be $300 a month. So this amount gets banked, if you will. And let's say, for sake of argument, the suite I'm going to use in this example, which has nothing to do with the tenant buyer. This is only the investors, for the investor's benefit in this case, is $1,350. So, we'll show the income as total income as $4,150. The monthly, that's from the rental. Then the monthly, with a monthly premium, that's $4,450 income coming in. We know our expenses to be $3,750. So basically, we've got a $700 positive cash flow, technically. If we multiply that by 12, we've got $8,400. Now, if we take that to the 5-year point, that's $42,000 technically of positive cash flow. Okay. Plus, there's $26,940 deposit. So we've actually got, in our bank account, if we spent none of that, there's $68,940 sitting in the bank account. Okay, so let's continue to break this out. Now, remember about our awesome one profit center of real estate, which is mortgage pay down. I love it. So remember our original mortgage amount was $620, and over 5 years, we've paid it down to $529. Not too bad. That's over $90,000 of mortgage pay down. Done by who? Oh, aren't our tenant buyers and tenants amazing? We love them. So we've got our appreciation factor. So we're selling to the tenant buyer at $898. Our original price was $775. So that's not a bad margin right there. Okay. So our sale price plus our cash flow, but we're paying back now our $529,942, which is what the mortgage got paid down to. So this is on sale 5 years later, right? Then we're paying back the $26,940 to our tenant buyer, plus his monthly premium of $300 times 60 months. So that's $18,000 that they get credited back. Plus our down payment that we put in, $155,000. And if we total our closing costs on both sides, let's say that's $3,000. So guess what our total profit is? Ooh, are you excited? In 5 years, that's a $207,118 profit.
Wow. That is 125%.
So again, the benefits to the investor, no management hassles. No management hassles. Uninterrupted rent, no vacancies. And if you guys have ever been landlords, showing uh, units and screening tenants. Is that fun? I've never found it overly fun. That's why my wife does it now. Anyway, no marketing costs as a result. Again, little to no time showing units. And the only reason why I put that there is because if there's a secondary unit with a tenant in it, as per the example I just showed, then you might have to show that unit. And then no repair costs, because the tenant is the tenant buyer is covering anything, and you've agreed to this in the contract that they cover anything under $400, $300, whatever the agreed upon amount is. And here's something you should also know. Rent-to-own investors want many of these at once. They don't just do one, they have many of them going on. And investors use joint venture partners to do this, which I believe, David, could be another topic for a future mastermind.
Perfect.
And investors need tenant buyers. So as David said off the top, if you have any clients who've been declined for financing, find out if they'd be interested in a rent-to-own program.
It would,
Right.
It would even be a great idea to call up mortgage agents and say, hey, give me a list of
1,000%, David. That's actually one of the strategies for sure.
Yeah,
Call
give me a
mortgage.
list of the last 10 people you denied a mortgage on. And then, here's your chance to actually get some leads from your mortgage agent, right? And then tell them, have a relationship and have a conversation. Take your mortgage agent out for coffee and say, hey, listen, next time you deny a mortgage, call me because I know what to do in that situation, right?
And their incentive is, hey, if you can turn this around and get me a mortgage
in 5 years, right? Because
but wait, no, it's 2, because
right, the investor client.
It's the investor client, and then ultimately the tenant buyer client.
Correct. Yeah.
So I hope that was as clear as mud. And
all right, guys, if I can get everybody to unmute themselves, because this is a great topic, and the more conversation we have surrounding this, the more questions we have, the more leads and more transactions this is going to turn into for you. And I really want you guys to get more comfortable with this as well. Everton, how are you? I'm going to pick on you because your camera's on.
I figured you would.
I saw you joined us a little late today, but did you understand the concept of rent to owns?
I think I missed the bulk of that information that was presented. Okay. So I'd love to know more about it. Maybe the pre-recording or somehow, but it did pique my interest though at the end.
Okay, awesome. Lots of good information that was shared today. So we definitely have the session recorded, and I can circulate it to everybody after today's meeting.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Vandana. How are you?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Very well. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you too. Very interesting. I was very curious about this rent-to-own concept. I've experienced it myself, but what I've seen is this works really well in a seller's market. Would you agree?
I think it works well in all different types of markets. In a buyer's market, obviously, there's less incentive for a long-term relationship to exist. However, if the buyer doesn't have funds or doesn't have good credit, this might be the only way of moving forward, right?
The one thing that can happen, Vandana, is if the market declines, there's, because everything is negotiable, the contract can be extended. The end price can be renegotiated. So, nothing is necessarily in stone based on market fluctuations. And this would be discussed up front with the tenant buyer, because obviously they'll have that. Well, if I'm paying $898 in 5 years and the property's worth now gone from 775 to, and the market doesn't move and I'm still buying it for this, what's the deal? Well, if they bought it for 775 and there was no gain on the actual price, that investor still got 123,000, or what was it? They still gained $90,000 in mortgage pay down.
Yep.
And they've had uninterrupted rent, which is all the rent part is the positive cash flow from the rent is the investors to keep. It's only the option consideration and the initial deposit that is what is refunded back to or credited back to the tenant buyer. So if it just acted as a mere rental property during that time as a result of the market not moving, the investor has still had uninterrupted rent, they've still had mortgage pay down, positive cash flow, and no management issues or maintenance.
What would change is your exit strategy on the investor side, but you can always sell the property, right? And have the new person or a new buyer assume the tenant. That could also be your exit strategy as well. And
here's the other thing. If the tenant buyer gets transferred or just realizes they're not going to make their 5% down payment ultimately to actual mortgage qualify, and they go, you know what, this isn't going to work for me. Guess what? What are the investors' exit strategies? Well, they can rent the property, they can sell it, or they can find another tenant buyer. And if they're smart investors, they've already got a list of tenant buyers in the wings to do other deals with. But in a case like that, contractually, that $26,000 and all of the option consideration money is not refundable. Now, a smart investor would, I think, they wouldn't be contractually obligated to refund any of the money, but a smart investor probably would give back a nice chunk of that money and still keep some. Make sense?
Makes sense.
So, I mean, there's so many, it's a malleable strategy, right? Based on what's happening at the time with the tenant buyer and with the market. So
yeah, think about all the problems you're solving in the industry out there, right? Like it's all about connecting people and solving issues. So I think with this strategy, you can do a lot of maneuvering and solve a lot of issues out there. I think
Makes sense. Yep.
I think the trick here is not to say, hey, I have a rent to own strategy. I think the trick is to go deeper than that and say, hey, this is my marketing message. This is the problem I'm trying to solve. And then once you get the commitment from people saying, hey, yes, I have that credit, I want to buy a house. Okay, let's sit down. Let me show you how, right?
and again, guys, in a situation like that, because it's funny, in the States, it's called a lease option, and it's much more known to the general public. And up here, although investors do it all the time, it's still kind of an under the radar strategy, which is funny. And the public generally isn't overly aware of it. So there's an education aspect to this, the investor to the tenant buyer, and you to the tenant buyer, and even to your investor who may be just a regular landlord type of investor. And if you're saying, hey, why don't you consider a rent to own on your property? Because it could be a way for them to exit and then buy another property, and you can go through the numbers and show them the advantage to this. But you're also filling a need by solving problems. And when you are talking to anybody, I find that opening with the car lease analogy will really help. And then when you translate that into the property, the pieces kind of fall in place.
Most people don't realize that with a car lease, what happens is there is a third party involved that actually purchases the car from the dealership,
That's it.
right? And most people don't realize it because they don't wrap their head around that piece of it. But what happens is the car is actually sold to a third party that buys the car, and then they rent it to the person who's actually driving it on an everyday basis. But that person never owns it. They just make rental payments on it, right? So it's exactly the same thing here. We're looking for an investor that has the money to assume the mortgage and buy the property in their name with a structured exit strategy 3, 4, 5 years down the line with a written return on their investment. And then we're putting in a tenant that is tied to the property that will be paying uninterrupted rent, that has committed to buying the property for a future anticipated value, right? And everybody wins. Like, we're solving so many issues here, so many problems, so many aspects by basically putting in a layer where we're putting in an intermediary that purchases the property, and you're connecting those three parties together is basically all that you're doing.
And
Right.
I have one other thing to say, which is a question that I get that I actually didn't put in the presentation, and I maybe should have. How long is the length of the rent-to-own term? Well, this is found out by taking that tenant buyer to your mortgage broker, who, by the way, everybody that has taken the training you've got 3 mortgage brokers that you've gone through the questionnaire and interviewed and chosen. I know you've all done that, right? Yes? Okay. Anyway, I'll take. So you take them to your mortgage broker, and they get their financial assessment, if you will, find out what they're making, where their credit is at, and which one needs to be worked on the most. And sometimes it's both. And determining that based on the rent-to-own finances, how much, because they also have to be not only paying rent and that option consideration fee, on the side, they still need to be, like in our example, they came up with 3% and they paid an option consideration fee. So we need to know at the end of the day, or at the end of the term, on that $898 purchase, how much is 5% down on that for them, and then work backwards. So how long will it take them to save for the 5%, including what the investors utilizing in that forced savings plan during the term? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think what Gord is saying is that there's a little aspect here of actually sitting down with the buyer client and just educating them and saying, hey, listen, you know what? In the 5th year, this is what your finances have to look like. It's kind of like coaching them, right? And saying, okay, so this is how much money you're putting away every month, and right now you're earning an income of this. Over the next 5 years, you have to get your income up to this level, and this is what your credit score is now. And these are some strategies on how you can improve your credit, right? But you're working towards something structured.
Yeah, and
so I have a question. Do you go after finding a buyer tenant first, identifying a property that they might want to buy, and then get the investor involved, or would you convert your seller into a investor's, your seller into a person who would, sell their property on a rent to own?
I would say a bit from column A and a bit from column B, in that if your seller is an investor, they can have that property first, right? So that's the property first. and then finding a tenant buyer that would like to buy that particular property, right? That's one way. The other is you've got an investor, but they are finding the tenant buyer, qualifying them up front as to what their capacity would be to buy the property. And finding out how long it would take them to buy that property, and then figuring out, so in our example of 775, if that was current market value, and they needed 5 years to be able to buy the property in a projected, with the projected amount of 898. So that's a 5-year term. Then you're finding that tenant buyer to be able to buy that property. Now, the other side of that is pre-qualifying a tenant buyer as to what they can afford, and then having an investor being able to buy that property that the tenant buyer finds that works within that ceiling, if you will. The top price that you can buy at would be X, and then you find them properties within that, which is more likely the case. The tenant buyer, then that's another position of being vested, because they're actually going out to find a property that they want that would adhere to under all of the terms and conditions.
Yeah. Then it's harder to convince sellers of this strategy. It's easier when you're on the buying side, right? So it's easier when you have the tenant and then you have the investor, and then you can structure it very easy.
And I also think as an agent, I would rather not convert my seller, just ask them to list and get my 2.5%. I would complicate the deal by, involving a long-term tenant into the equation. So if I had a seller, I would not, personally, if they wanted to sell, I would just list it and sell it.
1,000%. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you list it and if you list the property, right, you can use this strategy to bring the buyer in a mix and then get the full 5%, and then repeat the process on the buying side of the listing. But when you're representing the seller, I would say list the property, get your 2.5%.
For sure.
Yeah, because as an agent, you normally, when a person would do a rental, you would make a 1-month rent every single time, and you're gonna make your commission once in this case. Whereas, going the normal scenario, you would make your commission a couple of times over from the same client.
Yeah, so use this scenario like Gord said, you're going to make your commission 2.5% when you buy the property for the investor, right? And then when you sign the rent to lease option, you put in that, in 5 years, when this particular tenant buys the property, you make your 5% again.
Okay, yeah, that should be a part of the contract.
100%, 1,000%. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Hello.
Hi, Paulo. How are you, sir?
Hey, what's up, buddy? I'm okay. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining me this morning.
What's that? Yeah, no, this is a topic I've been looking at for the last couple of years for investor clients. There's a lot of moving parts to it, I'll be honest. And there are agencies already set up that do this. For example, I know of a couple, and there is a lot of I'm going to say questions, answers that you have to get from your client in the first place. But I'm looking at this on a more of an investment perspective. Gord, is there somebody that you work with regarding, the rent to owns? Or because, as I mentioned, there are some companies that have made a living doing this probably for the last 10, 15 years. And as you said, it's not something that's new to the industry. But they do charge a pretty penny as well. They take a big piece of the pie. So I was trying to look in this, for myself to try to do, provide this to my clients. But, as I mentioned, the other companies, they have accountants, they have mortgage brokers. So it's a lot of hands off when they do it. So it's just difficult for me as an individual to try to look at and try to convince my investor clients to go, I'll look for the property, I'll get the clients, whereas they can just kind of go to these established people or companies already, and it's kind of set it and forget it kind of.
Right, but you say that they're relinquishing, a big chunk of the deal to pay for that service.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Paulo, it's all about setting up a system, right? And I mean, I give Gord a lot of credit. The way he structured this investment seminar, you have to remember up front, the first 2 or 3 courses were all about setting up your team.
Okay.
Right? And if you go through that process and you set up your team correctly, all this becomes easier, right? But if you do it the other way around, right? If you try to find the client, if you try to do this and you don't set up your team, you won't succeed,
Yeah.
right? Because you're going to find too many roadblocks.
Okay. All right. So get the professionals, get everybody in place first.
You have to go through that process. And like I said, I give Gord a lot of credit. And listen, the way he designed this course is because of all the roadblocks that he's encountered over the years buying and selling real estate.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's only when you go through that on a personal basis and you go through it yourself, you realize that you run into the same issues all the time, right? And at the end of the day, so what if you find the perfect property, if you don't have the financing, if you don't have the appraiser, if you don't have the team of people around you that can make the deal happen, you're wasting your time.
Yeah, you're spinning your wheels basically.
Right, which is how you kind of feel right now, right? Because you know that this is something that will legitimately get you more deals.
Oh, for sure.
If you do this correct, if you go back to the beginning of the presentation and go to that slide when Gord and I kind of had that conversation back and forth, and you look at all the problems that you're solving, right? But you got to have a team, you got to have a system, you got to have the contracts, you got to have the know-how. But once you have all those things, it becomes easy. Guys, like I met one of my next door neighbors that lives 12 houses away from me. And I told him I'm a realtor. He started talking to me about rent to own. And I'm like, what are the chances of a random person in my neighborhood talking to me about rent to own? Like, it's such a niche market. And the guy told me, he's like, listen, this is what I do. I have 120,000. I have 4 JV partners. And that's all we do is we buy these properties on the investor side. And we find clients to put them in. And he's like, oh, it's so easy. We have a guaranteed like 150% return in 3 to 5 years.
Oh yeah, no, it is. It's true.
Right. And if like what investor, right? Look at the stock market, look at GICs, look at like all these different type of investments. Who can guarantee you 150% return on your investment?
Yeah.
And yes, there are risks, but those risks are minuscule. And I mean, as long as you have positive cash flow in the property, who cares if the buyer buys or doesn't buy or changes their mind or moves out or doesn't move in or pulls the trigger or doesn't, right? There's other exit strategies out there and that investor is fully protected. So.
And the mortgage pay down is happening.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
But I think you have to do the legwork first. You got to establish your team. You got to put all those things into context, and then you can go out and get and have these conversations.
I'm just finding just one last point. One big roadblock as well now is because of the multiple offer situation. So, you go in with an expectation of one number, what you can buy the home at, you work those numbers around that price point. And then all of a sudden, you've just paid 60, 70,000 over asking. So I'm just, kind of mentioning that's kind of one roadblock that people are seeing right now. But, is it going to stop? I don't think so. So it's probably something like a contingency you got to work into the plan, right?
Yeah, and just remember, you are part of a large brokerage. We have our closed Facebook group. I mean, there's, exclusive listings that come up for sale in the brokerage all the time. But if you have a relationship with a buyer tenant client, it's easier for you to go and advertise that client profile to other agents, other, other realtors in the office, and even other realtors you have a relationship with, right? And then, Paulo, over time, you're going to establish yourself as, hey, you know what? I have an investment property coming up on the market. I'm going to give Paulo a call first because he has a list of people he's already working with. Property might be sold before it comes on the market.
Yep, that's good.
Right? But it takes time to build that, right? But you got to start somewhere.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Great questions, guys. Thanks, Paulo, for your question. Really good question.
Yeah.
Susan, are you with us as well?
Yes, I'm with you.
Hi.
I don't have any questions yet. I have to always go think and read it again.
Okay. All
But
right.
it's excellent.
Awesome. This is some information that you can use in your everyday business working with investors.
Yes.
Awesome.
And we're struggling like with a few things, like Paula was saying, the overbidding, but maybe we can network with private sales through Broker Bay and stuff.
Yeah, and just remember, when you have a relationship and a trust level with a client, it's easier to go and have those conversations with other agents, right? And other agents are more attracted to you as well because they know that you have a professional team and you can merge the two and you can make it a seamless transaction for them as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a woman I met out here in BC who was an investor first, and she became, and she was doing rent to owns, and she became an agent, and she totally built her business to a ginormous, successful agent with a team, a significant team now, all based on rent to owns. She did entirely built her business doing rent to owns. So pretty impressive.
Marino, any questions?
No, actually, this topic is fairly interesting. I was somewhat familiar with it. I definitely have to get a little bit more information about it and keep it in the portfolio of information to have for the clients.
Yeah, how to structure and how to do more deals.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we have a recording of this that we're going to be circulating as well. And all of Gord's courses are recorded as well. So lots of really good information out there for you guys.
Yes.
Awesome, guys. Well, listen, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Excellent webinar. And we are going to be doing another one with Gord on Wednesday at 7 p.m. And this one is based for your clients. So again, because we've been doing so many of these and we've been getting a lot of questions from realtors, how their clients can do more transactions, we created a really brilliant and exciting way to get your clients more excited about investing in real estate. And it's a very basic presentation, but it really hammers home the fact that you can create a lot of wealth through real estate. And it's really designed to get your clients excited about idea of real estate investing. And we basically designed the program to take your client and get them more excited and turn a warm lead back to you so you can start working with them and so you can do more transactions with your clients. Again, this is the second one we're doing. We're going to be doing one of these every month. And this one is coming up this Wednesday at 7 p.m.
And David said it's a basic presentation. I take offense to that, David. It's not a basic presentation. No, I'm kidding you.
Well, it's designed to get your clients.
No, I know.
Introduction to investing course.
Yes,
Right?
it's an introduction to investing to get your clients excited, just your home buyer clients excited to become investors, and just showing them the power of real estate investing and how easy it can be for them.
Yeah. So if you've done a deal with somebody, if you met somebody at an open house, You know, this is a great way to basically get their feet, show them step by step of how to become a real estate investor. And it's basically a lead gen platform. It's designed for you to do more deals with that individual. So Gord, thank you for taking the time. I think as we do more and more of these, they're going to become more popular as people see the benefit
Cool.
of your clients to these.
All right, guys, go
Thanks
make
so
some
much.
deals
Everybody.
happen.
Productive week, and we'll see you guys on Wednesday.